Hello, as folks start to join today's panel, we'll do some introductions. If you're looking for the panel, what digital transformation actually means for sales compensation management, you're in the right place. Getting sales incentives right can be a strategic advantage, but what's standing in the way? For most companies, it's the disconnect between sales compensation planning and execution. Behind that disconnect are often disjointed systems, manual processes, and teams that are not working in unison. My name is Justin Lane. I'm the Vice President of Professional Services here at Forma AI, and I'll be today's panel moderator. With me today, I have two experts in the industry. I'll start off by introducing Dr. Robert Bishar, the Senior Director of Worldwide Incentive Compensation and Mergers and Acquisitions at Autodesk. Robert, welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
And also with me today, I have the CEO and founder of Forma AI, Nabil Alazam. Nabil, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Justin.
All right. So we wanted to start off by level setting, getting on the same page, though we might disagree. At a high level, what does digital transformation mean to you? And Robert, I wanted to start with you because I think you shared an excellent example with me previously that I'd love for the audience to hear.
Yeah, so thanks for inviting me on the panel. So with respect to digital transformation, a lot of people have what I would refer to as a self-centered view of the world, but actually where digital transformation starts is more on the outside, i.e. for our customers. And there's two examples I can give there. So say, for example, the construction industry in the past was very much manual, paper oriented. You got your blueprint, you went to the construction guy site, gave it to the foreman. And if you moved a window from left to right, a door from here to there, or anything else, there was a significant delay between when an architect made a change and when that actually arrived at the construction site itself. And that's a very simplistic example, but nowadays that can actually happen in real time. That's a true digital transformation. Another good example is in the media and entertainment industry, i.e. production of movies and films. In the past, you had what was referred to as a day roll, i.e. you filmed your movie or filmed your scene, went to the movie, developed the film, sent it off to the people who were basically processing it, and then it came to the director who then wanted to have changes or refilm or redo. So as you can imagine, say, for example, The Hobbit filmed in New Zealand, getting that movie back to Los Angeles to a studio, to maybe a production company sitting in India, to other people sitting in Europe, that's a significant lag in time. The digitalization of cameras happened early, and they did move from film to, say, USB sticks, but they were still sending them around the world. Now, while they're basically shooting the scene, it goes directly to the cloud. So basically, by the end of shooting that scene, all those steps that prior were delayed by physical delivery are now done instantaneously. So again, it's a true example of a digitalization of a prior very manual task that is now real time. Now, why do we care? So that's an example of digitalization of our customers, basically what we can enable for customers. But at the same time, that then creates a significant need for us to be able to predict and determine what are the customers going to buy, how are they going to buy it, what do I need to change overall, and do I have the respective data available to determine how I need to revise my plan to support what I'm basically now digitally transforming in the customer space. So basically one feeds to the other, and it's a continuous chain of events that fundamentally shifts how comp itself has to change as well. So it's no longer just incentive comp management that looks backwards, it's sales performance management that actually looks forwards. Sorry, that was a lengthy summary of my viewpoint.
I think that was great. In my mind, I have this image of a black and white, maybe a biplane or a prop plane and a leather helmet, and somebody's handing the big roll of film and flying across the world, versus today, like you said, instantaneous in the cloud going on the world. Nabil, a perspective on that? What does digital transformation mean to you?
So I think Robert's example is spot on. I think that's obviously an example of a big transformation when you think about going from like completely real-based manual in your hand carrying it physically to like a digitized cloud-based, whether it's production or construction example. What's interesting for me is that I think digital transformation is both small and big, and it's actually continuous. And if you think about why startups don't typically have a digital transformation, you don't hear of a startup doing a digital transformation, it's because every day we're just, as a startup, you're small enough that you can pivot and use the latest, greatest innovative approach and kind of continuously evolve the way you're operating. But the larger the organization is, the harder it is to make change, the more you accrue this technical debt from where technology is today versus where you are. And the digital transformation is that big shift. Because again, the production, like in that example, the Robert shared, it was slowly evolving over time. And all the technology is coming on time. It's until it can be packaged up to handle at that kind of complex full production. And so, to me, Robert's point on digital transformation and how it impacts specifically sales performance management, is that you need to be able to be forward-looking and think about what the future is going to look like. And so, I think, just very similar to Robert's perspective in this case. It's
all right. So taking it down a level to sales compensation, digital transformation, and I think that Robert, when we talked about this previously, you talked about tying into corporate digital transformation project. I think that, my thoughts were more along the idea of some people start off with ICM, maybe the admin piece. And then we think about SPM being the planning plus the administration. Do you want to talk about a little bit about the roadmap that you had there at Autodesk around digital transformation?
Yep, I can do that. So years ago, when the customer digital transformation started, our leadership basically came back and had questions of, okay, we need to make some changes to the comp plans. We need to adapt them to not just be reactive after the fact, which is mostly what incentive comp management does, but also be able to predict and estimate and properly calculate a lot of the things we want to do going forward. So basically, aligning what is the corporate strategy, what is the product strategy, what is the sales strategy, then with the comp strategy. Now, to be able to do that, you couldn't just rely on what you had in the past. We've luckily all far evolved from spreadsheets and pieces of paper and pocket calculators to incentive comp management systems that were perfectly okay to do the payout part of the equation. But what they can't do is actually process the data that is available today to be able to move and predict far more of what you want to do in the future. And I'll give you an example. In the past, when we did a SPIF and we did the costing for a SPIF, you always did the worst case scenario. And I call it worst case. Actually, it's the wrong word. It should be the best case scenario, i.e. if the SPIF is most successful, i.e. 100%, this is what it's going to cost you. Fundamental problem with that is it doesn't actually give you very much of a feel of, is it going to be successful, yes or no? As I said, we have a lot of the data available, and the longer you do it, the more data you have. And so what becomes part of the sales performance management equation, not just on the setup side, but on the other side, is the AI / old school name predictive analytics component that actually allows you to estimate, okay, this is probably what the success of this SPIF is going to be. And that's just one example of where in the past, you had a very crude method of doing it, but that crude method was basically, it was limited to your intellectual ability, what you could actually put into a spreadsheet. Now, it's not the intellectual capacity of yourself being able to implement into the spreadsheet. You basically just opened a completely different door that allows you to expand the horizon significantly in comparison to past.
Nabil?
Yeah, doubling down on like,
Yeah.
again, to Robert's point, the amount of data that is available today to better design and kind of, and think about it in a more predictive way is, far exceeds what was available even, let's just say 10, 20 years ago. I mean, the way that we're tracking sales rep activity, the way that we're, every single interaction that our sellers are having with the customers is being, captured and tracked. And the data today sits in very disjointed systems that can't be used to improve sales compensation and sales and financially modeling the ultimately the cost and the upside of any incentive that you're deploying. And so I think, the back to the digital transformation, as technology evolves everywhere in the organization, it's pushing the barrier, that technical gap and technical debt of the process that we're applying in sales performance management historically to where it needs to be to keep up with everything else.
I'll share a quick story. My dad, at one point in time, had moved down to Panama, and I went and visited him, and everybody had a cell phone, and I thought that was interesting, right? And I'm like going, my perception of maybe a country that wasn't as economically have the advantage that we had in the U.S., that there'd still be a lot of landlines. And he said, why would people go from no phone to a landline to a cell phone when they can just jump, right? They can take advantage, stand on the shoulders of other people and just go right to the most current technology. I think today is, I talk to a lot of companies out there where they're still thinking about, hey, we need to put technology, we need to do a transformation of some sort around this comp administration process, the ICM process, and maybe not thinking about that leap to what we think of as SPM, the planning and administration. Nabil, is there a point, right, of saying we should make steps along the way? And maybe a different way of asking this is, I don't want to call it a big bang versus incremental, because I think the big bang implies that it's scary or going to fail. But should people head straight towards a unified platform versus an intermediate step?
So, I mean, I think I'm going to say my perspective on this, but I think Robert probably is going to better outline this. But I think just like in any sort of transformation, any type of vision building, like, again, I think it was as a founder, this vision of what Forum was meant to be, you always aim for the North Star. If you don't have a North Star, you're kind of, how do you know you're climbing the right summit, right? How do you know you're going to the right direction? Along the way, as you get, you need to make incremental steps. And as you get closer to your North Star, the challenges and obstacles along the way start to become clearer. And so you start solving those in real time. But you have, in my mind, you have to have an ideal state and make small incremental steps towards it, as often and as quickly as you can. I don't know, Robert. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe adding to that, I think the step going from ICM to SPM, and sorry for using the acronyms, is not necessarily a big bang. It is a continuous evolution. And I think the key part behind it is, while you have a North Star, every time you get close to that North Star, there's actually a new North Star. And so the fundamental difference in the past was, if I had ICM, I pretty much knew where the limitations of the system or systems were, because in some cases there were multiple systems involved being an ICM solution. And so I pretty much knew what I could and couldn't do, and I pretty much knew where the walls were. The difference with SPM, if it's done right, is I start with a North Star because I have certain things I would like to accomplish, and however far you push those out, that depends on you. Do you want to do a gigantic leap, or are you going to take small steps? Either one is perfectly okay. It's whatever you wish to do. But once you get closer to that, you're going to see I've learned so much in the steps of getting there that the star I thought was the North Star just becomes sort of in the middle star in the Milky Way, and off I go to the next one, and off I go to the next one. So it is a continuous evolution and pushing of boundaries. And it's the limitations we had in the past are now just our intellectual limitations, no more these system limitations. And intellectual limitations, basically, once you get to a North Star, you become an insight into things you previously didn't have, which means that expands the horizon even further. So every time you get there, you learn something new, you continue to evolve, you continue to evolve. And that, I think, is the fundamental benefit of an SPM solution versus in the past using ICM.
Okay.
You know, I'll add just one other thing
Yeah.
I'm gonna add here is like the vision that you know, that I had and Robert back in that meeting room when, you know, we were yourself, Meredith, Lingo, Cindy and I we're chatting, and you know, the vision I had is around this concept of, you know, imagine a world 10, 15 years from now when a rep wakes up and based off of the deals that they're prosecuting, based off of the territory that they have, and ultimately what all of the data around that organization, they wake up in the morning and they get a notification on their phone that says, for this opportunity, if it gets closed in the next 2 weeks, here's the bounty you're going to get paid on it. If it doesn't get closed in the next 2 weeks, you're going to actually get a reduction in pay. Why? Because the data tells us that if it doesn't close in the next 2 weeks, it's likely not going to close. Conversely, you have 5 days of rain, where Robert and I are both in SF today, and 5 days of rain, and now you have a field seller that's going door to door. Maybe on day 4 of the rain, and this is the example that we talked about back in that room, and you know, maybe on using weather data, why not dynamically create incentives and spiffs and targeting? And so that's a very far out, you know, like that's a further out vision, and it changes the way that we think about sales comp. It changes the way that we think about how we engage with our sellers. That's a big leap, but to set up the foundation, the systems to enable that, that's the first step to getting there. You can't just go straight there if the systems don't enable that type of agility. So I think that's kind of like, but you know, I think there's,
there's a question from Meredith in the audience, just to level set, because we did throw out some acronyms around ICM, SPM. Can we break down for the people what sales performance management means? I guess, again, what does that mean to us definitionally? And Nabil, I'll pick on you.
I would say, historically, ICM, I mean, you know, and I would say in the early 2000s, ICM was really around, you know, productionizing the payout calculation of, you know, kind of creating a system to manage the payouts of incentive comp. And then this evolution of SPM was bolting on other piecemeal tools to help you with the administrative aspect of, defining the territories, or the administrative aspects of the quota management piece. But it was all disparate and disconnected. Whereas true SPM, and again, I'm not going to say this nearly as well as Robert's going to. I think Robert, I've heard you describe this in a much better way. But SPM is about using your data to be able to financially, to actually make better business decisions around sales strategy. And so, in my mind, you can't do that if all the pieces around sales comp aren't connected in a single system where I can financially model the what if I do this change? What's the financial impact? What if I make this, this adjustment? But I don't know, Robert, if
you summed it up right. There's one other part to the question there is like, who normally owns the system? And so traditionally on the ICM side, there's basically the three-legged stool, and it's always one of them that owned it and the other two basically collaborated. So that was HR, finance, and sales operations. What we're seeing more and more now is sales operations evolves to global revenue operations. And that takes on far more than the old traditional just incentive comp management and comp plan design. It goes into the direction of actually doing the what if scenarios, and often doing the setup, the quota, estimation. So there's a top down from finance, but then what do you do on a distribution model? That's often now seen in global revenue operations. And so more and more of the sales performance management efforts and quote unquote tasks reside within global revenue operations.
Yeah,
But-
I'll chime in with that. From what we see often is that there's people that own systems and pieces of the processes, but it's definitely one of those ideas that doesn't necessarily fit like a nice puzzle piece into a puzzle up against traditional business functions within organizations, because it is truly cross-functional to the departments that Robert mentioned, as well as oftentimes who somebody owns data. You're working in collaboration with a lot of folks, and so I often like to think about the idea of a RACI matrix: who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be informed of the different pieces of end-to-end SPM. But I like this idea, definitely, of as we move into this world of revenue operations, it makes a lot of sense for it to go that direction. But again, corporate culture, corporate context matters. I've worked with organizations in the past where they definitely see the idea of planning as finance, and they want to make sure that everything's the beans are counted correctly and that they're it's auditable process. And I've worked with other organizations where HR sees it as part of total rewards. It's another component of pay, and they want to own it from an operations standpoint. And I think ultimately, who can execute on it best is probably where it belongs within the organization. But if you have any sort of sales team or people that are paid on variable pay, it needs to exist somewhere.
Yeah. And I'll push the boundary a little bit on that one, on the statement with respect to sales performance management with a shift of the overall market. So for example, our digital transformation was also part of going from perpetual license to subscription to consumption-based models. So, excuse me, all of a sudden your sales performance management becomes a variable incentive management, even though that sounds a little obscure to many people, but your adoption and consumption are just as important as the sale itself, because without adoption and consumption, there's no renewal of a subscription. So all of a sudden you see an expansion of the respective roles that are within that sales cycle or within the lifespan or the life cycle of a customer that are extremely relevant, both from pre to post sales, that need to be covered within a true performance management system. And this is where I think the evolution is going. I said, we all had a North Star with sales performance management. We're kind of getting closer to it. It was like, oh, but it's not just the salespeople. It's also the customer success side of the house. Doesn't necessarily have to be just people, but let's just start there. I need to do something there, or what are the expansion roles? How do I take care of that? And so your metrics fundamentally shift, and your system has to be able to keep up with that.
Yeah, I think that's such a valid point. Like, there's also this element of the pace of change technology wise is only accelerating, which means that digital transformation in the organization is only going to keep accelerating. And so the speed, like agility, is becoming, I think, one of the most important, requirements of SPM, in terms of a system that can adjust and move is going to enable you to make changes as things come up. And one thing to backtrack to the stakeholders that own comp, in incentive comp. I mean, comp just broadly is a politically charged topic, right? It's a very sensitive topic. No one wants to talk about comp. No one goes to their boss on a weekly basis and talks about their salary or their pay. Like it's a topic that is difficult to approach. And ultimately, if you think about an organization that's having conversations and trying to steer the ship and move and be more agile when it comes to incentives, or again, incentive comp, if you're doing it from a place where you don't have the data to make that decision, it becomes an emotionally charged conversation. You go into a room with a bunch of senior leaders, they all have different perspectives. HR has one side, sales is another perspective, finance is another perspective, and you're trying to make a decision that's not backed by data. Because it's politically charged, it's going to become emotional. The moment you can approach, the way to diffuse that is by having the data to come to the room and streamline decision-making across all those various stakeholders with a data-driven approach that takes away that, the complexity and the emotional aspects of the comps.
Now, one thing to supplement that, comp design is, I'll call it 70% data, science, math, and 30% black magic, which means it's basically an emotional decision, because the data is there to support the emotional impact I'm going to have on a salesperson. So you actually have to understand both sides of the equation. But in the past, you didn't have the data to make predictive decisions, quote unquote. You made decisions based on your best estimate, your I'll call it your gut experience and things like that, but not necessarily based on all the data you had available. And so with that, with the data available, it becomes far easier to have the conversation how a certain direction of a comp plan will influence the salespeople to take certain actions, sell certain products, go a certain route, as opposed to doing something fundamentally different.
Yep.
And so it's the combination of both that is necessary. Doing comp plans is never going to be easy. I mean, it's never going to be something you can do sort of as a side hobby. That usually doesn't work too well. But having the data available allows you to all of a sudden create comp plans that are easy to understand, although intrinsically complex within. And so the key is, we all know the KISS principle, and I will not spell out what the acronym stands for. I might get in trouble for that, but we try to keep it as simple as possible. You can do it on the back of a napkin and you fully understand how and what. So with the AI components to SPM and everything else that goes with it, you're able to do predictions and create comp plans, as said, that are complex inside, but to the outside, simple. It's a number, and how you get there is easy.
I mean, I'm just gonna add a quick little, side tangent here. I was at a conference last week with a few other tech founders, and obviously the topic of AI and generative AI is kind of a very hot topic now. And so as we were kind of having this discussion of, does generative AI take away from human creativity? And the interesting concept here is, I agree, Robert, 100%. You're not going to take away the 30% black magic, or really it's kind of the art behind sales comp. And that's the human expertise. As a comp team, you're coming in, you're playing with the human component of incentives. The interesting thing with AI is the starting ground, the environment, the data sets that you use spur the direction that the AI generates a result. And so, as we evolve and we think about, I think someone else asked the question in the chat around kind of the AI and sales comp, is like, as you think about what you need to do is have a foundation where you can collect data in a structured format, and then be able to, over time, the role as a comp team is we're seeding the right data, the right context into an algorithm, the art, and then having the system generate a bunch of results. And then the other side of the equation is the art of reviewing the outputs to see if they are going to intrinsically drive what we think is going to be the right behavior. And so there's an entire element that kind of ties into that.
And to your point with respect to AI, the data drives the intellectual and sort of intrinsic decisions that you can make afterwards, which is sort of the knowledge base, the art, which then drives the AI to come up with the next level of data and information, which then takes you to the next level, which comes back to the point, your North Star keeps moving. It never stands still. And that's the beauty of it, that there's always going to be a human factor, but your human factor is pushed just as much towards the next and the next and the next North Star. Yes, today, I mean, when we had incentive comp management, the North Star was very simple. You paid out correctly. That was it. And yes, you could see distribution curves and a few other things, but that was pretty much it. Now, all of a sudden, you can predict, you can do what if, you can predict the costs, which in the past was crude at best. And so there's multiple facets where all of a sudden your capacity to do things, and I'll call it dream up things, becomes far more than you've ever had in the past. And the human factor will never be taken away because you are leading that direction.
I want to dig in a little bit deeper on this data concept. And I'll share a quote. And I don't have the attribution. I apologize for this, but it's something along the lines of, the better you are at turning data into insights, the better you become in understanding and meeting customers or users' needs. Problem being, data is locked up in specific applications, controlled by people, sometimes of poor quality. And I think when it comes to design, oftentimes there's a timing issue. People will go gather this data at one point in time during the year, do all this rigmarole of analyzing and the application of the dark arts to come up with a comp plan. And then things, immediately things start to change. But, we have this data set that's kind of static in the world. So here's my question, right? And maybe it's leading the witness, but how do companies unlock that sales compensation data? And I think we've hit upon these ideas of modeling and predictions, but is there any specific use cases or ideas we could share with the audience on how to unlock that data?
You want to start, Nabil?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, this is, by the way, I'm in a LEED certified building, and so the motion detector for this room happens to be over here, which means I need to get up and move every 20 minutes. But so yeah, I started my career as a consultant on the other side, actually implementing platforms like the ICM platforms and helping set sales comp strategy. And the interesting thing, it kind of step back and you think about the amount of data that something like ChatGPT or whatever, OpenAI or any sort of data model, AI-driven data model, the amount of data that's consumed is orders of magnitude more than any single organization possesses today from a sales performance management perspective. And so there is this element of, in my mind, I saw every project that I went to do, we treated sales comp as an isolated, siloed fashion. Every organization was trying to solve the same problems time and time again, and the data was completely disparate. I couldn't take data from one organization and translate it to another organization, So how do we actually all benefit? No single, I think, some of the largest sales organizations that I know of are in the 150,000 to 200,000 payees. That's one organization. That doesn't scratch the surface on the amount of data that's required for true AI. So how do you solve that problem? You need to create a consistent approach to data across sales performance management, across every single industry and every single organization, so that we can all benefit from the data around best practices in sales comp. And so there's an element of, it's the consolidation and consistency of the data, and then being able to react and actually move fast enough. Because what good is AI in sales comp and from an insight generation perspective and from the data if you can't move on it fast enough? So I think the final piece I'll add here is that in my mind, this little jump, this shift in thinking around sales comp is in essence its own mini digital transformation in how we think about SPM. Yeah, the data, we have to start thinking about data in a much bigger lens. But Robert, I'll pass it to you. I don't know.
Couldn't agree more. The complexity is around multiple data sources that in the past we didn't we may have thought about using, but we didn't know what to do with it. And so what SPM enables and opens the door to is using information that in the past was either locked up because it was too complicated to get to, or we just didn't understand what it actually meant, tying it together with things that are comp related, allowing you all of a sudden to do predictions and modeling, not just based on, now I'll go a little broader than just a single company, So if you think about the experience of one company, other companies have similar data. So if you have an anonymous amount of data, of course, you can mine it and use it to the benefit of everybody. Doesn't mean we're competing with one another, doesn't mean we're stealing from one another, doesn't mean we give, the company secrets away. Quite the contrary. Actually, everybody benefits from it because there are certain directions that everyone can benefit from at the end of the day, even though you use them slightly different to your advantage, of course.
Exactly. And there, sorry, go ahead, Justin.
No, go ahead. There's a question that I was gonna bring up as long as we're talking about data.
Yeah. No, the big.
The question, and I love this opening statement of my entire career. This kind of sets the tone. My entire career, I've had to clean bad data. How can we ensure that any generative AI produces good outcomes, even though data inputs, more likely than not, are very poor? And this, you are not alone. When it comes to calculation of sales compensation, design of sales compensation plans, oftentimes, it is the tail end of a lot of upstream data. And we feel, this multiplier of errors when it comes to being at the end of that data chain. I have some ideas certainly on data cleanliness, transformations, how to try to approach to fix it upstream. But Nabil or Robert, is this something we want to jump into high level? Maybe some practical ideas of how to get cleaner commission grade data at an organization, or is it another topic for another day? Because I think we could make this a long topic.
I was about to say that's one of the longest topics you can ever start with, and my true belief is garbage in will always be garbage out. But having said that, you described it as we're basically the recipients of a lot of upstream. One of the sort of descriptions when we explain to people what is actually incentive comp is what I call the waterfall model. And it comes back to, it starts up top and goes through the individual steps. But at the bottom, you've got this gigantic bucket of water, i.e. data in this case, that you need to consume and properly use. What we're getting to now, which wasn't possible in the past, is in the ICM world, you weren't really able to identify and specify where your true errors lie. Yes, of course, your billing information, your booking information, sure, your account segmentation, your who's the customer. You could do that to a degree, but now there's actually far more that you can pinpoint to and say, you're not just going downstream and being what I would call the victim of bad data. You're now actually able to influence back up and show the impact of bad data, which in itself, if you talk to any CTO, CIO, and say, okay, the impact of your data being so bad is the following, and you can put that in an order of magnitude of dollars, that usually has a convincing argument in it that they will listen and understand that there are certain changes you have to make upstream to improve the quality overall. And I think the connectiveness, and when I say digital transformation, we use it all the time. We started with it as a topic. Your digital transformation is also the connection of all the data sources together, which in the past were independent, disparate, whatever you want to call it. They weren't necessarily as dependent on one another, even though they always were, but it wasn't always seen that way. I think now you truly see the connection between them. And so there is a general direction of improving the quality of the data. And that goes for literally every system in any company's ecosystem.
I'll chime in real quick. If to me, it's a constant battle. Like, this is not, data quality is not a destination. Like some other things we talked about, right? It's a continuous Kaizen effort of constantly trying to make it better, because you're battling entropy upstream as manual touch or human people or, are putting in data upstream, you're constantly going to be fighting it. I think where we've seen people be successful, downstream at the comp process is the folks that have put together an automated, what I'll call quality control, quality assurance checks at steps in the process. And then kind of this relentless effort to identify errors, root cause, and then go chase it back upstream to try to prevent it from happening again. But then as you get those errors, you're adding that new use case into your QA, QC check. So that, what was 5 things you're checking for after a year, maybe it's 40 type of thing. But it is kind of this relentless approach to saying, hey, we want to get it right. But it's certainly, it's a high effort. And like you said, like Robert mentioned, the juice has to be worth the squeeze. You got to find the dollars around it, right, to show that there's quantifiable and qualitative impact back to the organization to pursue it. But it's not easy.
Nope.
I'm going to steal a phrase that you said, Robert, yesterday. I wrote it down. Not small, but not difficult, I think is the phrase you used, right? I think this is not a small initiative for a lot of companies around data quality, but not necessarily difficult to take that first step and start to put some things in place.
Yeah. And then I think the part of the question that, that asked about how do you ensure, kind of like when you leverage that data to produce, again, for downstream, use cases, which can be, predictive analytics, AI, it could be all kinds of things. I think the one benefit that we have in sales comp is when you produce the payout and it's been validated, that data, you have a validation element of like, it has been checked and validated. I mean, from a few different lenses, right? We think about, it is validated by us as a comp team. It is validated by the finance team, but it is most definitely validated by the sales team. Of course, it's usually validated on the side of making sure they got paid enough. So if it's over, there's a bit of a question on the validation there. But the point is that is a very powerful data set. So yes, on the input side, you can have all kinds of issues. But once the data is validated and run through the system, that data can now be used to do all kinds of predictive analytics. And so to give you an idea, I think one thing that I saw missing in my career as a consultant was nowhere are we actually tracking in a consistent single data set or data source what type of performance increase or behavioral increase do we see at a specific type of incentive? Is a static bonus more likely to drive behavior X, or is a dynamic commission rate type of component more likely to drive behavior X for this specific type of industry segment, et cetera? And that data can, back to the point of like, if you're collecting that outcome data across all the, across customers, across data sets, that in and of itself, that data is relatively robust and accurate because it's gone through the entire life cycle of sales.
All right. I think we have about 15 minutes left. Any questions that people have, we're happy to answer. I think there's 2 more topics I'd like to get through that are a little bit more tactical for the people on the phone. So for the folks on the phone that maybe own the sales compensation process, whether that be the design, the administration, or both. If they're part of an organization that's going through digital transformation, what are these next steps they can take? And maybe that's for Robert. And then if they're not, if their organization is not part of a corporate level digital transformation, what can they do to take action? Maybe that one for Nabil. I'll start with Robert. Like, how did you, owner of say Worldwide Global Incentives, get engaged with the corporate digital transformation? What did that look like? Was it use cases and assessments, this idea of customer stories or journeys?
Yeah, it was a combination of a few things. So we sat together as a team, i.e. the sales incentive comp design team, and we were basically running into what I would call guardrails or walls, i.e. the limitations, in that we were asked to provide information, predictions, analysis that we couldn't. So that was sort of the initial trigger to think about, okay, our incentive comp is what we've done up until today, and it was perfectly fine. We paid people correctly and it was good. But how are we going to satisfy the need for information? I won't say data because it's basic information is data at the end of the day, for information and insight that we just could not produce. And so at the time we started looking around, it was like, well, how are we going to fix that problem? And we came upon the acronym Sales Performance Management, and then a lot of people identified sales performance management as quota setting, territory management, seller assignment. We had a slightly different view of the world. We see those as necessary, but those for us were more sales operations for the incentive comp side of the world. We wanted to see the other side. We wanted to see, okay, what are outcomes we can predict? What is the what if scenario? What happens if we model? So all those things, we started asking the questions and trying to figure out who would be able to do that. Now we know it doesn't happen overnight. We know it, you have to have data to be able to produce more data. So, and that's perfectly okay. And so this comes back to, is it a big bang or is it an iterative process? No, you start with a normal implementation and then you continuously gather the data. And at some point, you've got that sort of minimum base of data available where you then can do modeling. You can do the what if, you can determine spiffs, you can model your costs way better than you ever could before. And so coming back to your question, we were getting requests, we were getting asks, we were asked for information, we were asked for insight that we couldn't provide. And so it required us as a team to sit down, and we basically whiteboarded and thought, okay, what do we actually need? What do we want? What are we missing? And that's what led to the whole journey of SPM. And I think, as I said, it's not a, how do I phrase it? It's not a North Star. The journey is actually the success and the road, not the North Star itself, because every time you get to one, you get to the next one, you get to the next one, as said before.
Nabil, any thoughts? If somebody already owns a legacy tool, if somebody is still stuck on spreadsheets, like how do they make the case for change? Where do they start?
So, I mean, I think there's an element of, it's not a tool problem per se. It's, you know, I think, I don't know, rarely most organizations that I ever see just a single tool used to process this, right? It's a kind of a disjointed piecemeal approach. I think it's a process and tools. That's why it's such, again, it's this bigger shift of going towards it. And so I think there's an element of, you know, approaching this no different than, you know, I think Robert outlined, you know, a very important process is, what are the things that, you know, we can't do or are limited today? What are the boundaries that are limiting us from being able to achieve what we want to achieve as a sales comp team? And I think, you know, the ultimate approach has to be, okay, this is where we want to go. These are the key requirements that unlock that. And then it's kind of creating that structure towards that, because doing the same thing and expecting a different result is not going to, you know, it's not the solution. And so in my mind, it is radically rethinking the way that we approach the entire process, and ultimately the tools required for this new approach and process may or may not be the tools that we're using today.
Yeah.
So if I can react real quick, somebody just wrote in the chat, stuck on spreadsheets, new solutions are cost prohibitive. That's actually an interesting one, because I think all of us at some point in our career have gone through exactly that one. And I do remember working for my prior employer where they had all their salespeople, their comp on spreadsheets. And the justification for moving to a comp system was actually fairly simple, because if I calculated the amount of hours we spent, so not the technology was the cost factor, but the people were a cost factor, and it was prohibitively expensive and error prone working in spreadsheets, in addition to not being SOX compliant, in addition to any audit trail being a nightmare. So when we basically the sum of all those components, it was a very easy decision to go to a system. And I think that continues. Now, for those people today who work in spreadsheets and that can literally leapfrog instead of having to go to ICM and then go to SPM, consider yourselves very lucky because you actually get to jump over that old step. So you actually get to go to the, I'll call it the 21st century in one step. You save yourself a lot of headaches and pains related to the old world, quote unquote. But I think if you truly do a cost analysis, you'll see that the benefit of moving to a more modern system and the insight it provides you with will show a positive return on investment overall. And the operational costs will likely be lower than what you're paying for people today. And I'm not saying make them unemployed. That's not my point. But allowing them to do more value add task as opposed to data tickering in spreadsheets definitely satisfies people more.
Robert, can I follow up on that a little bit? Like, I think from the idea of lessons learned, when I think about big change at organizations, I always think about that idea of cultural shift and talent shift. And I think we've chatted about this before, but like, how do you embrace a new culture around digital transformation and prevent regression? And then how do you help people, I don't know if it's reskills, right word, but how do you think about, talent and skills in a new world?
So it comes a little bit together with something that I mentioned earlier, which is what I call the hero effect. So in the past, we always had people in spreadsheets and they worked until 2 o'clock in the morning on Friday night to get the payouts ready. And they were, yeah, great. You worked until 2 in the morning on a Friday night. Nobody wants to do that for the rest of their career. That's a quick road to burnout. So it's culture shifting and explaining to these people that there's actually a better way to be a hero. If you can get done by Tuesday afternoon, instead of Friday morning at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're actually the bigger hero. And so it is, to your point, it is a fundamental cultural shift for people because, I personally don't like the statement, work smarter, not harder. But in this case, it is very applicable that you do it today because you don't have another way of doing it. If you're shown a different way and shown you can be done earlier, number one, and number two, your status within the company significantly increases because you're all of a sudden not just spending all this time looking at numbers. When I'm doing that, I don't have time to think about what do these numbers actually mean. If I'm now done Tuesday afternoon, and it's just an example, all of a sudden I'm able to think about that number. And so the time I spend from Tuesday afternoon to Friday morning, before I disappear for the weekend, I can give a lot of insight to those senior leaders. And now I'm a real hero, as opposed to before, I was a workhorse hero, but I didn't actually provide value. I just provided a result.
Yeah, I think the comment was made just to the hosts and panelists, but the idea of I haven't been able to take a true vacation in 3 years. We pay monthly. To the person that submitted that, you are not alone. This is, a very common thematic idea we hear from a lot of people that do the calculation processing.
I mean, I think the worst part about it too is this concept of hero. I mean, staying up till 2 a.m. to get the payouts out. The thing is in some cases it's not even recognized. Like rarely is it actually thanked by the organization because hey, to get paid accurately it's a requirement. It's not thank you for paying me accurately. Like I expect to be paid, and frankly, the sales reps are working. So it's sales comp has been set up to be unfortunately a thankless role, and I think that elevation of to be more strategic is worth so much. I mean, if you step back and think about, okay, fully loaded costs, sales comp resource, if you truly see it as just in the weeds, you're just cranking away, the organization, you are purely, it is a cost of execution. That same cost as an investment into better design and better strategy has a 10x, 100x award. If that resource that's stuck in the weeds in Excel is able to think strategically about sales comp strategy, it is not unheard of to drive a 1 to 4% uplift in sales if you have better incentive alignment across the organization. And if you think about the scale of revenue, a 1% could be, orders of magnitude larger than the cost of that resource. And so, I hear this from CFOs all the time in discussion, especially in this market, where it's, what's the cost of managing sales comp? And it's, you need to think about it as what's my return on investment in how we're managing sales comp, because the return on investment of managing it properly can generate much higher uplift in sales and ultimately much bigger ROI than trying to just focus on just making it slightly more efficient of an Excel process and ultimately reducing your expenses that way.
And the risk of making mistakes in Excel or the lack of audit, your internal audit, and people will appreciate it if they don't get raked over the coals every time we do a payout. So.
Quick comment that was made, comp plan design and rating it for automation would be a real help. If that's not a best practice within your organization around comp plan design, along with the ideas of, is the plan motivational? Is it, cost effective? There's a whole checklist, how we think about sales compensation. We're certain, if you're not responsible for that and you can put that in place, we're certainly happy to be the third party expert and share some ideas with the team that is at your organization, but that should certainly be on there. Can it be made operational or automated in some fashion, or maybe, come up with a different idea around comp? But
yeah, this is again, it's another area where it's, ideally the sales comp team, and Robert, again, I think, getting your input on this would be very, very helpful, but the sales comp team should be a business partner to the sales organization. The sales organization should never be coming to the comp team with, here's the plan, go build it. They should be coming to the comp team saying, this is the objective we're looking to drive, help us build the right incentives. And I think, I don't know, yeah, it'd be interesting if, just again, your perspective on that, Robert.
Yeah, I think what you just referred to is, I'd like the pay me more plan. Yeah, we're not going to do that. Jokingly stating, whenever you roll out a comp plan, there's a barometer you have that if you hear no noise, then you really know you've made a mess of it and you're going to pay way too much. If you hear an excessive amount of noise, then you probably made a mistake and you need to tone it back. But if you just hear normal noise, you're actually in the sweet spot, and that's perfectly okay. Because remember, a salesperson, they're doing what they're doing best, which is selling, and trying to convince you they need to earn more is also a selling job. So that's perfectly okay. You need to be able to determine how much of that is thought about pay me more versus what is actually a strategic direction. And so we try not to let the sales team design the comp plan. We try to let them say, what do you actually want to accomplish? What do you want to sell? What do you want to accomplish? What's the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah. And the one final piece of that question that's rating it for automation, SPM should never be a barrier to rolling out the right incentive plan. And I think that is the one of the biggest pain points that I saw as a consultant, and ultimately what led to me founding Forma, is if it's the right decision for the business, it's the right plan, we shouldn't have those guardrails to limit us to be able to do that.
all right, Nabil, Robert, thank you so much for sharing these thoughts and ideas and wisdom with myself and the attendees today. We're at the end of our time together. I don't know if you have a final words of wisdom or just a thank you for the audience, but we are out of time.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. It's been a fun discussion, and thank you for the comments.
Absolutely. No, thank you, everyone. Yeah. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you. And we'll see you at the next one.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.